The Big Boy was America's most powerful steam locomotive, until one machine made all 25 of them obsolete in less than a decade. It didn't outpower them, it outthought them. So why does almost nobody remember the locomotive that destroyed the Big Boy? In the winter of 1941, Union Pacific unveiled the Big Boy, and the railroad world stood in awe. These behemoths stretched 132 feet from pilot to tender, weighed over 600 tons fully loaded, and generated 6,000 horsepower of raw pulling power. With their distinctive 4884 wheel arrangement, they conquered grades that broke lesser engines hauling mile-long freight trains over Sherman Hill and through the Wasatch Range without breaking stride. The Big Boys weren't just locomotives, they were monuments to American industrial might. 25 of them ruled Union Pacific's mountain territories, their thunderous exhausts echoing through canyons as they dragged trainloads of war materials and Western commodities toward the coasts. Railroaders spoke of them with reverence, and the public treated them like celebrities gathering trackside just to watch these giants pass. But beneath the glory, a problem festered that no amount of horsepower could solve. Each Big Boy required a crew of 6 just to operate. An engineer, a fireman shoveling coal, a head brakeman, a rear brakeman, and often additional helpers for mountain grades. Before and after every run, an army of maintenance workers descended on these machines. Boiler inspectors, bearing packers, valve specialists, and coal handlers worked around the clock. The economics were staggering. A single Big Boy consumed 16 tons of coal and 12,000 gallons of water on a typical run from Cheyenne to Ogden. Water towers dotted the landscape every 30 miles, and coal facilities required constant staffing and replenishment. Every 150 miles, crews had to stop for servicing, and every 1,500 miles meant a trip to the roundhouse for intensive maintenance that could take days. But sweet, 1945, Union Pacific's accounting department presented numbers that chilled the boardroom. Annual operating costs per Big Boy had climbed to nearly $300,000. Equivalent to over $5 million today. Labor contracts were strengthening, coal prices were rising, and the post-war economy demanded faster, more efficient freight movement. The Big Boy's reign had made Union Pacific legendary, but it was also making the railroad vulnerable. Industry insiders whispered that steam's days were numbered, but nobody could imagine what would replace it. Early diesel-electric locomotives showed promise in flat terrain and yard switching, but they lacked the muscle for mountain warfare. The Big Boys seemed irreplaceable, trapped in a paradox of being both too powerful to abandon and too expensive to sustain. Union Pacific needed a miracle, a machine that could match the Big Boy's strength while slashing its operational burden. What came next would shake the foundations of American railroading. In March 1947, a secret meeting took place in Omaha between Union Pacific's executive team and representatives from Electromotive Division, General Motors' locomotive manufacturing arm. The diesel builders had been waiting for this moment. For years, EMD had watched railroads struggle with steam's limitations, and they'd been developing something revolutionary, not just a locomotive, but an entirely new system of railroad operation. EMD's chief engineer, Richard Dilworth, laid out a proposal that seemed almost too good to be true. Instead of building one massive locomotive to replace the Big Boy, EMD would create a standardized diesel-electric unit generating 1,500 horsepower. The genius lay not in individual power, but in what EMD called multiple unit operation. Through a standardized control system, a single engineer could operate multiple locomotives in perfect synchronization from one cab, effectively creating a flexible power plant that could be scaled to any task. The FT model had already proven successful in freight service on flatter routes, but Dilworth's team had refined the design into something more powerful. The F3, followed rapidly by the F7 and the revolutionary GP7 road switcher. These weren't just locomotives, they were modular building blocks. 4 F7 units coupled together could generate 6,000 horsepower, matching a Big Boy's output. But that's where the comparison ended and the advantages began. A 4-unit diesel required only 2 crew members, an engineer and a conductor. No firemen shoveling coal, no water stops, no coal facilities, no armies of maintenance workers at every terminal. Refueling took minutes instead of hours, and the locomotives could run 500 miles between servicing instead of 150. Maintenance concentrated on electrical systems and diesel engines, technologies that were becoming standardized across American industry. Union Pacific's president Arthur Stoddard ran the numbers and saw the future in sharp relief. 4 F7 units. Cost roughly $600,000, about the same as 2 big boys, but their annual operating costs came to less than $120,000 per consist, a fraction of what steam demanded. They could haul the same tonnage, run faster schedules, and operate around the clock with quick crew changes instead of the lengthy servicing stops that steam required. The deal was struck in June 1947. EMD would deliver an initial order of 40 F7 units, with options for hundreds more. Union Pacific's engineering department began planning the infrastructure changes: diesel fueling facilities replacing coal towers, new maintenance shops equipped with electrical diagnostic equipment, and crew retraining programs. The countdown to steam's extinction had begun, and the big boys, still in their prime, suddenly faced an opponent they couldn't outmuscle: pure economic efficiency. On a gray October morning in 1948, the first diesel consist rolled out of Cheyenne Yard, bound for Ogden with a test train of 4,200 tons, exactly what a big boy typically hauled. Yard workers and steam crews gathered to watch, many with skeptical expressions. These sleek, relatively small machines, painted in Union Pacific's armor yellow with gray roofs, looked nothing like the towering iron giants they were meant to replace. The lead engineer, a 30-year steam veteran named Thomas McKinley, later described the experience in his journal. "We accelerated so smoothly I barely felt the train start moving. No lurching, no wheel slip, no smoke. Just quiet, relentless power building with each notch of the throttle." The 4-unit lash-up climbed the approach to Sherman Hill at a steady 25 miles per hour, maintaining speed where big boys typically slowed to 15. The dynamic braking system, a feature steam could never match, allowed them to descend the western slope under perfect control without wearing brake shoes to nubs. The run from Cheyenne to Ogden, which typically took 12 to 14 hours with a big boy including servicing stops, was completed in 9 hours and 47 minutes with the diesels. They refueled in 20 minutes at a single facility instead of stopping 3 times for water and coal. The maintenance crew waiting at Ogden found little to do. Oil levels checked, a few filters inspected, and the units were ready for the return trip. Word spread through the railroad like wildfire. Within weeks, dispatchers began requesting diesel for premium freight runs, and superintendents competed to get the new power assigned to their divisions. The diesel's reliability was staggering compared to steam. While big boys averaged 65% availability due to constant maintenance needs, the diesel units were running 90% or better, sometimes operating for weeks without anything more than routine daily inspections. By spring 1949, Union Pacific's second order arrived. 60 more F7 units, followed by the first GP7 road switchers. These general-purpose locomotives added versatility that steam could never achieve, equally capable on mainline freights, branch lines, or yard work. The railroad began reorganizing its operations around diesel efficiency. Crew districts were extended, terminal facilities consolidated, and the vast infrastructure that supported steam, coal mines, water treatment plants, ash disposal systems, began its slow march toward obsolescence. The big boys, still mechanically sound and theoretically capable, found themselves increasingly sidelined, not because they'd failed, but because they'd been outmaneuvered by an opponent that changed the rules of the game. Economics, not engineering, had delivered the fatal blow. The question now wasn't whether steam would survive, but how quickly it would disappear. Union Pacific's accounting department released an internal report in December 1950 that sealed steam's fate with brutal clarity. The analysis compared 1 year of operation between big boy number 4019 and a typical 4-unit F7 diesel consist, and the results were devastating for the steam advocates, who still believed in the old ways. Big Boy 4019 had operated 87,000 miles during 1950, spending 198 days in active service and 167 days undergoing various levels of maintenance, inspection, or repair. The diesel consist, by contrast, logged 142,000 miles, with only 48 days out of service. The difference in availability alone meant the railroad could haul 60% more freight with the same number of power units. Labor costs told an even more striking story. The big boy required 47 different workers across its operational cycle: engineers, firemen, hostlers who moved the engine in yards, boilermakers, machinists, blacksmiths, coal handlers, water treatment specialists, ash removal crews, and inspection teams. The diesel consisted of 12 engineers, a smaller mechanical team, and fueling attendants. Union Pacific's HR department calculated that each diesel eliminated 35 positions compared to equivalent steam power. Fuel economics completed the picture. The big boy consumed approximately 16 tons of coal per run at $8 per ton, totaling $128 per trip. The diesel consists of 480 gallons of fuel oil at 12 cents per gallon, costing just $57, $60 for the same distance. But the real savings came from elimination of the water infrastructure. Union Pacific operated 127 water towers across its system, each requiring pumping equipment, treatment facilities, and year-round maintenance to prevent freezing. Dieselization would eventually allow the railroad to abandon this entire network. Speed and schedule reliability added another dimension to diesel's advantage. Big boys averaged 22 miles per hour over their routes when including mandatory service stops. Diesel consists maintain 28 miles per hour averages with far fewer interruptions. On time-sensitive freight, perishables, mail contracts, priority merchandise, this speed advantage translated directly to competitive advantage and premium rates. By mid-1951, Union Pacific had taken delivery of over 200 diesel units and placed orders for 300 more. The railroad's transition plan projected complete dieselization of mainline operations by 1956, with steam relegated to backup service and special situations. Wall Street analysts praised the modernization program, and Union Pacific's stock price climbed 40% as investors recognized the profit potential of reduced operating costs. For the big boys, the writing blazed across the wall in numbers they couldn't fight. They could still outpull any single diesel unit, still command respect from crews who'd grown up in the steam era, but they couldn't overcome the relentless mathematics of operational efficiency. The destroyers had arrived in the form of balance sheets, not brute force. The winter of 1953 brought the moment steam loyalists had been dreading. Union Pacific Management issued General Order 847, establishing a firm timeline for steam retirement. All big boy operations would cease by December 1956, with earlier retirement if diesel deliveries accelerated. The then order hit veteran steam crews like a death notice for an old friend. Some railroaders fought back. In the Cheyenne Roundhouse, senior engineers circulated petitions arguing that steam provided essential backup capability and that complete dependence on diesel technology was reckless. They pointed to a February cold snap when several diesel units failed to start, requiring big boys to be hastily fired up for emergency service. "See?" the petitioners argued. "You'll need us when your precious diesels freeze up." But management's response was swift and data-driven. The diesel starting failures affected 8 units out of 347 in service, a 2.3% failure rate during extreme weather. During the same cold period, 12 out of 23 big boys experienced frozen water systems, cracked pipes, or steam leaks, a 52% failure rate. When the numbers came out, even the petitioners fell silent. The end came faster than anyone expected. In July 1956, 4 months ahead of schedule, Big Boy 4024 hauled its final revenue freight from Cheyenne to Ogden. There was no ceremony, no official photographers, no fanfare. The locomotive simply backed into the Ogden Roundhouse, was cleaned and drained, and joined the growing line of retired steam power awaiting disposition. By September, all 25 big boys sat cold and silent in storage tracks across the system. Union Pacific's diesel fleet had swelled to over 600 units, and the railroad was operating the most efficient freight service in its history. Transit times had dropped by 20%, fuel costs per ton mile had fallen by 42%, and labor productivity had increased by 67%. The modernization that seemed radical in 1947 was now the industry standard, with every major railroad in America following Union Pacific's lead. The scrapping began in early 1957, Workers approached the big boys with cutting torches, reducing these symbols of American industrial might to scrap metal for $18,000 per unit, about 10% of their original construction cost. Union Pacific's pragmatic management saw no value in preserving machines that represented obsolete technology and expensive operations. Of the 25 big boys, only 8 survived the scrappers, saved through last-minute intervention by museums and city governments who recognized their historical significance. The rest vanished into furnaces, their steel recycled into new products for a new era. The diesel revolution had been so complete, so economically overwhelming, that preserving steam seemed almost quaint. The destroyers hadn't just defeated the big boys, they'd made them irrelevant. By 1960, Union Pacific's dieselization was complete, and the results exceeded every projection. The railroad operated 750 diesel units, serving routes that had once required over 400 steam locomotives. Freight tonnage had increased 35%, while total operating costs had dropped 28%. Wall Street celebrated Union Pacific as the model of modern railroading, and other industries studied the transition as a masterclass in technological adoption. But something had been lost in the transformation, something the balance sheets couldn't measure. The towns that had grown up around steam operations, division points like Green River, Rawlins, and Laramie, faced economic devastation. These communities had built their entire economies around servicing steam locomotives. Roundhouses that employed 200 workers were replaced by diesel maintenance facilities needing 40. Coal dealers, water treatment plants, and the network of suppliers that supported steam operations closed their doors. Green River, Wyoming, told the typical story. In 1948, the town's population stood at 4,200, with 830 residents employed directly by Union Pacific's steam operations. By 1960, the population had dropped to 2,600, with only 180 railroad jobs remaining. Main Street businesses, cafes that served rail crews, boarding houses, equipment suppliers, shuttered at a rate of 2 per month through the late 1950s. The diesel revolution had saved Union Pacific millions, but it cost these towns their reason for existing. The cultural loss ran deeper than economics. Steam railroading had been a craft, a skilled trade passed down through generations. Engineers studied under senior men for years, learning the personality of each locomotive, the art of firing a boiler for maximum efficiency, the techniques for coaxing power from iron and steam. Diesel operation, by contrast, was more like driving a truck, important, but largely standardized and teachable in weeks rather than years. Retired steam engineer Carl Magnuson captured the sentiment in a 1962 interview. The big boy had a soul. You could feel it breathing, feel its power responding to your touch. These diesels are just machines. They do the job, but there's no heart in it. Thousands of veteran railroaders shared his view, taking early retirement rather than transitioning to diesel operations they saw as soulless and mechanical. Union Pacific's management acknowledged these costs in private memos, but concluded they were unavoidable consequences of progress. A 1961 internal report stated it plainly. The railroad exists to move freight profitably, not to preserve jobs or maintain traditions. Dieselization was essential to our survival in an increasingly competitive transportation market. The big boys had been destroyed by diesel efficiency, but the victory carried a price paid by workers and communities across the American West. Progress, it turned out, was never truly free. Today, 8 big boys survive in museums, lovingly preserved as monuments to an era that ended not with a whimper, but with a calculated business decision. Union Pacific even restored Big Boy 4014 to operating condition in 2019, running excursions that draw thousands of spectators. Yet these preserved giants are relics, museum pieces that demonstrate how quickly technological supremacy can become historical curiosity. The diesel locomotives that destroyed the big boys, the F7s, GP7s, and their descendants, get no such reverence. Most were scrapped decades ago, replaced by more modern designs in the endless cycle of railroad evolution. You won't find preserved F7s drawing crowds or inspiring nostalgia. They were tools, effective and efficient, but ultimately disposable in ways the big boys never were. This creates a strange historical irony. The losers of the diesel transition became legends, while the victors faded into footnote status. Railroad museums across America feature restored steam locomotives as centerpieces, while diesel units, if preserved at all, sit in outdoor storage or behind chain-link fences. The machines that revolutionized railroading are forgotten, overshadowed by the very locomotives they made obsolete. But the impact of that first generation of mainline diesels extends far beyond railroading. The transition Union Pacific pioneered between 1947 and 1956 became the template for industrial modernization across America. The methodology, careful analysis, phased implementation, focus on total operational cost rather than initial capital expense, was studied and replicated in factories, shipping companies, and utilities throughout the 1960s and beyond. The diesel revolution also proved that emotional attachment to tradition cannot overcome economic reality. The big boys were magnificent machines, beloved by crews and the public alike, but sentiment didn't slow their retirement by a single day once the numbers turned against them. This lesson resonates in today's debates about sustainable technology, automation, and industrial transformation. Modern Union Pacific operates over 7,000 diesel-electric locomotives, direct descendants of those first F7 units that rolled out of Cheyenne in 1948. The railroad moves more freight with fewer workers and lower environmental impact than the steam era could have imagined. The big boys' destruction, while painful for those who loved steam railroading, enabled the efficient freight network that supports America's economy today. The locomotives that destroyed the big boy weren't just machines. They were harbingers of a future where efficiency trumped romance, where economics determined survival, and where the most powerful could still be made obsolete by the more practical. They changed railroading forever, then quietly disappeared from memory, their work complete. But here's the question that still lingers. If these revolutionary diesels could make the mighty big boys obsolete almost overnight, what technology is waiting right now to do the same to everything we consider modern and irreplaceable today? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Please leave a comment below and give this video a like if you enjoyed it. See you on the next one.